This might be a good week for us to dispense with the usual pleasantries and get right down to business on the OHL podcast, because I will not tell a lie. I've got a lot on my mind this week. You thought there were only 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're adding another one. This might be the gospel according to Mike on the OHL podcast this week. The preaching. Dan, did you go to church this weekend? Dan Mahar, my good buddy and podcast partner.
I did. I was waiting for a reading from the Gospel of Mike, but I didn't hear it.
We might add the Gospel of Farwell, depending on how you like to look at this. But that man over there is Dan Mahar, good Catholic boy that he is. I was raised that way. I'm not as good a Catholic boy as Dan is anymore. But the Gospel according to Mike is coming. But before we get to that, while you're here, and don't unsubscribe just because I'm making a little bit of fun of the books of the Bible, okay? Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Tell a friend about this podcast because it is your premier source for junior hockey information. Yes, Dan and I are based in Kitchener, but that doesn't mean all we see is the red and blue of the Kitchener Rangers. And that's going to be a bit of a theme this week on the OHL podcast. So you've hit subscribe, you've promised to tell a friend, and remember to find us all over the social medias. Dan is at his name, Dan Mahar on X. I am at Farwell_OHL. Instagram, the OHL podcast. Facebook, the OHL podcast. We are on YouTube. You might be watching or just listening from there already, but check out the OHL podcast on YouTube. Lots of behind the scenes stuff for you as we travel around this Ontario Hockey League. And of course, our email address, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Did we ever get a lot of feedback from last week's episode? And we love it. It's a junior hockey podcast. We want you to be involved in the junior hockey conversation. So ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Use it anytime you want. Let's dive into the Brotherhood of the Traveling Hat as we get things underway this week, Dan. I'm heading to Kingston later this week. That is the ultimate destination for the hat that I picked up in Sudbury in late December. It's been to Windsor. It's crossed the border to Erie. It's enjoyed some fries with me in Owen Sound. I don't know if you saw what happened to it. We even did some work on the camera together in London, the hat and I, this past week. But I don't know, Dan, if you saw what happened to the hat in Kitchener this past weekend.
I did not, no.
Mark Perry, good guy, good northern boy, my buddy from Timmins, does work with the Guelph Storm Rogers TV crew, and he does great work. Like, Perry really pours himself into this job. And because it was a Guelph-Kitchener game in Kitchener this past weekend, Perry was doing some pinch hitting with the Rogers crew in Kitchener. And wouldn't you know, he was caught. Somebody caught him on camera walking out of my press box, my broadcast booth at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium with the Sudbury Wolves hat in his backpack. He was taking it because he said he had to do it for the North. I don't know how those northern boys work, but he said he was doing it for the North. And then somehow it ended up the next night in Niagara with Steve Clark. All of this is documented on Instagram, the OHL podcast. If it gets to Kingston and ultimately to Alan Etmansky later this week, I can't be sure right now. It went from Mark Perry stealing it from Kitchener to Steve Clark's head in Niagara. It is one popular hat, Dan Mahar.
Well, isn't Mark Perry's from Timmins? Isn't Sudbury down south to him?
Exactly. That's what I thought. If you're doing it for the North, it's not supposed to go further than the Nickel City, pal. Come on.
But I will give, kudos to Steve Clark for letting that hat leave in your possession, because I know there was a threat to it earlier in the week, and he came up with a hat of his own, I believe, and his shall we call it ambitions to take over the green hat somewhat resembled someone else's ambitions to take over the green land, but he backed away from that he rethought that when he got a lot of pressure from NATO. Said, forget this. So anyway, I'm glad you still escaped, and it looks like you're just a week out from getting it to its final destination.
Absolutely. Don't say NATO has no strength anymore, okay? Because I've got the hat back, and it will make its way to Kingston later this week. A lot of storylines for us to consider as we're into the final third of this OHL season. One of them is bums in seats. And Dan, you have noticed something when it comes to attendance figures.
Yeah, well, really specific to kind of two centers this week. So first, that game you were at in Niagara this weekend, nearly a full building for Niagara Kitchener. Great to see. I mean, anytime I see that fan support for the Ice Dogs, and I know there were a lot of Kitchener people that traveled. There was a fan bus. There were a lot of people that came down for the game. So it's partly to do with the opponent. But nevertheless, that rink filled up for that Niagara team, and I love to see it. And then the other one, and this to me, Mike, is the true test of a good junior hockey market, is how much that Oshawa building sells out. And they had a run of great teams. This year, not so much. Sitting in the cellar, tough year. For me, the mark of a great junior hockey market and a great fan base is when they support them through thick and thin. You know you're having a down year. You're showing up anyway. You still recognize the entertainment value. You still support the kids. You know that these things are cyclical and they'll turn. And so kudos to you, fans of Oshawa, for continuing to show up for that team. And that's what makes a great junior hockey market.
I remember being in St. Catharines for a game on a Saturday several years ago, and that was, still in the scandal-filled years. I was kind of joking with some of my colleagues in Niagara about the way the season has gone, a sellout that particular night when we were there, and they said, well, it's been a good year in some respects, including the fact there hasn't been a scandal yet this year. Because it's been tough. It's been tough, and we know it's been a struggle for the community to warm up to the current ownership in Niagara. So we talked a little bit about that, but a few years ago when I saw a Saturday night game there in the midst of some of the worst times, it was still a great crowd, 4,500 maybe plus. It was 5,300 sold out on Saturday. And one of the other reasons for it, I can tell you, there was a hockey tournament in St. Catharines. So a lot of the teams from that tournament took in the game, which I love to see because these kids are out playing, maybe hoping they'll be in the OHL someday. And just to put it in perspective for you, Dan, one of those in-arena timeouts that they take twice per period, they last close to a minute. And throughout the entirety of one of those in-arena timeouts in the first period, the public address announcer at the Meridian Center was reading out all of the groups that were at the game that night. Wow. So, but again, if you're going to get that kind of support, and it's a great barn, the Meridian Center, Tribute Community Center too. I don't want to take away from that, but a couple of great barns right there to see junior hockey in.
Yeah, and Mike, look at the play. Look at the impact on the play. So when you fill the building for those kids, look how those Ice Dogs played for that game against Kitchener. I mean, that's a heavy team coming in to play against them, and the Ice Dogs showed up from puck drop to puck finish, and they got the win in regulation. And don't tell me it doesn't energize these teenage hockey players seeing a full building. So keep that in mind when you're debating what you're going to do on a Friday or Saturday night and whether it's worth going down to the game because the team's not doing so well. Keep in mind that boost they get from the fans showing up is not something to sneeze at.
Joey Costanzo has become a bit of a favorite on this podcast, Dan, dating back to last season and when he was in Brantford. So the road goalie, he's there, of course, with his Windsor Spitfires, and he has this great interaction with a young fan down at the Glass who had special seats for disabled fans. And it was a great, heartwarming, human interest kind of story, and Costanzo was right at the center of it. Of course, this season we talked about his connections to Glenn Hall, how his mask, and Hall, of course, having played in Windsor. So Joey really understanding the tradition of goaltending, particularly in the city where he was playing, ended up getting his mask signed by the legend himself, Glenn Hall, because he's got his mask made up as a tribute to him. And Joey Costanzo joins a pretty exclusive club this past week as he has recorded his 100th win in the Ontario Hockey League. Only Adam Dennis and Jacob Oster have reached 100 along with Joey Costanzo. And then above that, Devin Williams from Erie with 106 wins, Joseph Raymakers from London with 109, Kyle Gajewski from the Sioux with 114, and J.P. Anderson of the long ago Mississauga St. Michael's Majors with 126. But Costanzo joins the 100 wins club in that exclusive group, regular season wins, that is, since 1980. And it just made me think of your point last week about maybe one of the reasons we're not seeing a 100-point player this year, and still nobody's on pace for that, is because of the quality of goaltending.
Yeah, I'm loving it this year, Mike. And when we get to the wraparound portion of today's podcast, I'm going to have a bit of a goaltending heavy content this week as well, because there's so many great stories. But what I love about Joey Costanzo, we talk about what a great kid he is on and off the ice, but that arc of a goalie, and I'll talk about this in the wraparound, we often see fans and media or whoever get hard on goaltenders for, things aren't going that well when they're 16, 17, 18, but it's a hard league and it's a development curve, and the goalies are often, I find, a year or two behind the players in terms of development. It's goalies don't come out of their shell quite as early and have an impact on this league as many of the skaters do. So you got to stay with them. You got to bear with them. And Joey Costanzo's arc I just love because, started and worked and made steps every year, every month he was in this league, really, to the point where he's now elite. And I love seeing it because that's the arc you want to see with all these goalies. He's the standard for other goalies to look at and say, things may not go your way when you're 17. They may even be still hit and miss when you're 18. But here he is just dominant in his overage year, and I love seeing it.
Yeah, I wonder, I don't want to eat your wraparound lunch, but I wonder if Mason Vicari's name is going to come up then, because I know you're on Western Conference. No, I'm on Western Conference.
You're on West, yes.
Okay, forget it. That's right. So I guess I'm not going to eat your lunch on that. But yeah. Vicari's another guy like that. I think we talked about Jackson Parsons earlier this season on our podcast, who kind of grew into himself there and established himself late. It takes a little while. Goaltenders, no matter how good they are in this league, right, still take a while usually to make it to the next level. But yeah, Joey Costanzo, now tied with Adam Dennis and Jacob Oster, will obviously add to that and finish his OHL career as the 5th most wins, maybe even more depending on how high he can get. I guess Devin Williams at 106 and Ray Makers at 109, probably not out of the realm of possibility for Costanzo. Most regulation wins since 1980. And I'm just looking around at the stats this year when we look at goaltending, Dan. The top 4 goaltenders in the OHL right now all have sub 2.50 goals against averages. You've got Ryder Fedorov at 188, Costanzo himself at 208, Sebastian Gatto at 227, and then Jack Lisson up in North Bay at 233. 11 goaltenders are 900 or better in the save percentage category this year. Those are some pretty good numbers from the crease.
Yeah, everywhere you look, there's good goaltending, and I think what I'm really noticing is not just the starters, the backup. Like teams are 2 and sometimes 3 goalies deep this year, and it's not just you and I both were trying to pick who would be our goaltender of the year this year, and you and I both avoided the trappings of the obvious call and saying Carter George, and you went with Ben Rebick, I went with Ryerson Leanders. And then Ryder Fedorov comes out of nowhere and he's dominating it, right? So I think it's just been a phenomenal year for goaltending, and I love seeing it because for too long we were hearing about how the goaltending wasn't up to snuff in this league, but this year it sure is.
Last week, you and I touched on the Adam Levac suspension that we knew would come. We thought it would be heavy. It was. It was an 8-game ban for Peterborough's Adam Levac for a slew foot, kind of in the midst of a fight where he took Caleb Deitch from Ottawa down and then landed a few punches. Clear slew foot, not the kind of thing you want to see. Boom, the 8-game suspension was assessed. And then this week, it seemed like every time I turned around, there was another suspension being doled out by the Ontario Hockey League, 4 of them to be exact. So maybe not as many as it felt when I was getting those notifications. And it makes me wish I was more of a stats geek, Dan, or maybe just kept better records, but I've never tried to. If anybody does and you want to drop us a note, you've got verifiable information on the number of suspensions year over year. It feels like, and by the way, the note can be dropped, OHL Podcast at Rogers.com anytime you want. But it feels, Dan, like there have been more. I don't know if that's the case, but 4 in 1 week have been handed out, and probably the most significant, which at the time of this recording has still not had a game value assessed to it, but is another Peterborough player in Braden McCallum.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what's in the water in Peterborough where the anger is? Because, like the severity of suspensions hasn't always been that high. I mean, we see a lot of, 2 games for this, 3 games for that. Exceeding the fight threshold is your automatic. We're seeing, but yeah, it just seems like the volume's pretty high every week. There seems to be a couple, and we talked about this a long time ago in this podcast where, for the league, they want the opposite to say, we're serious about, we're tough on crime, right? We're keeping your kids safe, so send them here because we will crack down. But at the same time, you also don't want the PR of suspensions being your headline all the time. So, and yeah, the Braden McCallum one, we'll see how the league rules on that. We see Luke Dragosica in Brampton, year-long suspension for a kind of a baseball swing to the head, and everyone agreed that was absolutely justified. It was a terrible optics, terrible play, and then followed up with a punch when the guy was down. Braden McCallum did not connect with John Banks on Owen Sound, so that may be a significantly mitigating factor, but the intent was really ugly when you watch that, just that baseball swing as Banks is leaving the scene, and thank God he didn't connect, but you gotta temper that instinct. So it'll be really interesting to see how the league rules on a intent without execution, I guess, for this one. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, it's interesting because we get into that gray area, right? We could look at the Dragusica swing, and Brady Blasek came back, the next game, or he missed just one? I think it was the next game he was back. So, intent versus outcome, I don't think should factor into the severity of the suspension, because what we saw by way of intent was something we absolutely do not want to see in the game. So does McCallum get a pass just because his aim was worse or something like that? Because it's still a pretty vicious swing. And look, I'm not trying to pick on the kid. I'm just saying, like, this, regardless of the outcome, was a very dangerous play, the kind of thing we just don't want to see. John Banks didn't do anything wrong. He made a hockey play, took McCallum out of the play near the boards, and then in response, as Banks turns to go back up ice, McCallum, as he's getting up, takes that big baseball type swing and catches Banks up near the shoulder blades area in his back. It's not a good look, and I think the league has got some work to do here.
Yeah, for sure. And this will be a good I guess trial balloon for the league to see where they go with this, because I mean, your number one goal was suspensions. People talk about punishment, but it's mostly a deterrent for people considering these actions later, right? When you're in the heat of the moment, I better not do this. This is a no-go zone. This was, a significant suspension. So we'll see what the league does with this. But yeah, the intent and the action itself were not a whole lot different than what landed Mr. Dragusic on the sidelines for a season. So we'll see.
I might add a frustration I have with the league, and I get why it's not the way I wish it was, but the league does not keep the suspensions list active very long. The players kind of like drop off. I would like to just be able to go back and look from the beginning of the season, who got suspended and why and for how many games. But again, from the league's perspective, I get that you wouldn't want to have that front and center for somebody to just look at on your website, because then the perception could be, oh my goodness, this is a very dangerous place and I don't want my son playing there. So I understand the league's perspective on that. But again, as I said when we started this part of the conversation, I don't keep those kinds of notes to measure suspensions year over year. Like, I would like to know, are there more being handed out now? Are there more games assessed? I don't know. I would also take the glass half full approach and say, listen, you could be one that says, okay, this is kind of scary. Do I want my kid to play there or not, etc.? Or do you look at this and say, hey, the league takes stuff seriously and is still, very serious about player protection. We're going to hand out these suspensions, and I think, significant enough deterrence. We saw Matthew Hilachar get a 4-game suspension, a repeat offender, the Kitchener Rangers forward this week. I think the league is still taking it seriously. They could make that argument too, say, hey, yeah, you're seeing suspensions, but that's because we care about the safety of the players, and we want to make sure we're giving stiff enough deterrence and frequent enough suspensions to change the behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't even want to throw another variable into this, but I also wonder too about, we always talk a lot about the changing dynamics between NCAA, CHL, etc., and a lot of these players are, committing elsewhere earlier and have options for the next year, and how does that play into actions? And I'm not suggesting anyone's going to have nefarious intent, but you see this in leagues around the world. You have since the dawn of hockey, where if a player's not back next year, they're coming to their end of their run. What's to prevent them from doing something a little more serious, right? If their team's out of it and whatnot. So we'll see how the league stick handles those things too, and will that lead to increased suspensions because they want to deter that type of action as well. But not an easy job doling out these suspensions.
If you'll forgive the shameless self-promotion, and you follow the OHL podcast on YouTube, I put out a weekly video called Fridays with Farwell. In that video this week, I posed a question that I want to get Dan Mahar's response to here on the podcast. Plus, we got an email a while back, and I didn't really think much of it until I read my local newspaper this past weekend, and the beat reporter covering the Kitchener Rangers for the Waterloo Region Record went down a similar path. So Dan and I will talk about that too. It's involved with the way the standings work in the Ontario Hockey League and whether or not it's time to just do away with divisions, plus a look at every market in this league with your weekly wraparound, all of that and more still to come on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, is built for the fastest game on ice. With player props and live betting, every shift, every shot, every save gives you options to get in on the game with DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Dan, the email I got about a month ago, it was late December, we got, and I'm sorry, I should share more of these with you, but it came from Andrew, and he was just asking the question about the standings. And I thought that we had gotten used enough to this by this time that, we could just deal with it in email and move on. But maybe that's me just being too invested in this league. Andrew's question was, this again is just after Christmas. At the time, the Ottawa 67s lead the Eastern Conference, just ahead of the Brantford Bulldogs points-wise, but the Barrie Colts get slotted into the second seed in the Eastern Conference. Same thing was going on in the West. Flint had started their incredible run. Windsor was still leading the Western Conference, but Flint was right on their heels points-wise, but the Kitchener Rangers get slotted into the second seed because they were leading the Midwest Division. So the way I explained it to Andrew, and we'll quickly go over here for those that don't know, in the East example, Ottawa was number one in the conference, 1 point ahead of Brantford or whatever it happened to be, but they play in the same division. The leader of the other division, in this case in the East, the Central Division, was the Barrie Colts. And if you're leading the division, you automatically get the next highest seed. So the division leaders go 1-2, even if the third place team in the standings has more points than the second place team because of the way they get it seeded. And that was the same in the West, where Kitchener had fewer points than Flint, but still was leading their division, so got the second seed. I've never loved it, Dan. I know what the league is trying to do with it, and that is reward teams for winning their division. But we're getting close to playoff time now, too, and this is going to factor into home ice advantage when the playoffs begin, etc. Enough from my perspective. Let's throw it over to you, Dan Mahar. What do you make of the way we're doing this?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head a second ago when you said from the league standpoint, they make more meaningful wins for these teams, right? If you have four division winners, they can celebrate that. You get the seedings. That's four more markets that feel like they've had a very successful season. There's some sort of reward, more engagement, whatnot. I think, from my perspective, it's tough because it changes year to year. But when you look at certain divisions are obviously much tougher than others, and you have the imbalanced schedule. So we'll use the Midwest, for example. Midwest is always a grinder, right? It's a meat grinder. You've got Kitchener, you got London, you've got Guelph, Owen Sound, Erie's had some. So you have really tough competition that you're playing more often. So in theory, what that would say is that, if you get more points in that division than a team in a weaker division in the West, maybe you should seed higher. So it's almost a double-edged sword when a team playing weaker competition gets more points than you, or gets fewer points than you, but gets a higher seed because they won that division. So I think from a fairness standpoint, let's just go by points. But it ties into a conversation we're going to have later too, which is, do we need that imbalanced schedule? Let's make it meaningful where points are the ultimate dictator. Whoever has more points finishes higher in the standings, gets home ice. But let's balance that schedule a little more so people don't say, well, yeah, but we played London 8 times. They didn't have to. So I can go either way on this, but I always feel like it's kind of artificial to have a team that has fewer points higher than a team and it just confuses people too when they look at the standings too. So I'm okay with disbanding with that concept.
So I'm with you, and I'm going to go even a little bit further, and here comes the first of your gospel according to's on the OHL podcast this week, okay? So I'm going to go in a couple of directions here. First of all, that that beat reporter I made reference to at the Waterloo Region Record is Josh Brown. He covers the Kitchener Rangers. And I want to use this as an opportunity. Look, even if you are not a Kitchener Rangers fan, but a fan of the Ontario Hockey League, I'm going to encourage you to follow along the work that Josh Brown does, because something that he does after his Friday night game recaps is he adds something to the online version of his column or his story called Brownie Points. Clever, because his name is Brown, right? But it's just it's a rundown of all kinds of things in the league. And so if you're a fan of this league, you don't have to be a Rangers fan or whoever they were playing that night, but Josh makes a lot of really interesting points in his Brownie Points. And it was this past Friday where he brought up this same thing that Andrew talked about. And Josh argued that we should just do away with divisions, have 2 conferences, and then that would eliminate this confusion where a division leader gets seated higher in the standings than another team, to your point, Dan, which I think there's a lot to that. Here's another little bit of a tangent on that. So this past weekend at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium, when we were there for the game, I see a lot of Josh Brown. I saw him on Saturday in Niagara too. We travel around this league covering the Kitchener Rangers. And I was telling him how much I enjoy his Brownie Points every Friday night. It's true. My tradition is finish the game. I stay around and do a post-game show with my broadcast partner, Josh Piercy. And then a little after 11, I'm heading home, and I'm going to post-game with a cold beverage because that's what I like to do. And I'll take out my phone and I'll read Brownie Points because I love to do that. And this son of a gun, I was telling him all Friday night, I'm like, dude, I can't wait to get home and read Brownie Points. This is my tradition. I love the Brownie Points. And so then I read the Brownie Points, and what's Brownie doing? But he's pumping the tires of another podcast. I'm like, is he doing this to me on purpose? Is that what's so he's pumping out Reese Domani and Colin Ward, who do the OHL in 60. And first, let me be clear about this, okay? Reeser and Wardy, I love you guys. Like, I love you guys like brothers. Love the work that you do. But hang on a second. It's the OHL in 60? 60 what? I'm curious. Like, because 60 minutes? Because the last one was 73, and the one before that was 74. And just before Christmas, you gave me an 84-minute. Like, what? Guys, is it the OHL in 60 or the OHL in 73? That's why this podcast, Dan, you and I make sure it's 45 minutes to the nut every week, right? Oh, last week we did 52 minutes? Is that what? Okay. So I love the OHL in 60. I love Colin. I love Reese. These guys are great. And I'm glad that Brownie gives them the occasional shout out because of the work they're doing. They really are. It's the Armchair GMs podcast network. Brandon Caputo is the big dog over there. I think they're still looking for a nickname for him. His initials are BC. If he ain't the big cheese, I don't know what you guys are doing. So there's all the help I can give you, but check out the OHL in 60. Follow along, subscribe to your local newspaper, support local journalism. Mike Davies is doing great stuff at the Peterborough Examiner, right? Jim Parker at the Windsor Star. I could go on and on with people. Ben Leeson up in Sudbury. I read these guys all the time because I want to know what's going on in the league. And if we support the work that they're doing, chances are it's going to continue getting done. These are professional journalists that are around the league doing good stuff. Reese and Colin are great podcasters doing really good work. These guys hustle. They deserve everything they're getting and then some. So kudos to them. I don't know if Brownie was messing with us, Dan, or messing with me in particular, shouting out another podcast when he knew I was looking forward to reading his Brownie Points. But I am leading Brownie's way here. And why don't we just dispense with the divisions? Make it 2 conferences. And then you talked about the schedule, the unbalanced schedule. We've talked about this time and time again. These, to me, are really easy fixes for the Ontario Hockey League. I don't know why we don't make them. No more 8 times per year against any one team. Let's eliminate this confusion in the standings and say you've got an Eastern Conference, a Western Conference, 10 teams in each, and let's go.
100%. Well, first of all, I wasn't sure where you were going with all that podcast.
I know there's a lot there. It was really like the Old Testament, the entirety of the Old Testament you just got. Yeah,
it was great though, because I just when you were calling out their podcast for the timing, I thought we're on thin ice here, Mike. We're on thin ice.
I did say at the beginning of the year to Dan, we're going to make 45-minute episodes every week.
Yeah, no, those guys are great, and you're absolutely right about those who cover this league. And is worthy of support. But yeah, I'm with you, because the last point I'll just throw in on the because I say dispense with it too and just go with conference, especially because if you're stuck in a division, we talked about it, so we'll use the Midwest as an example. In Erie, I love you. You guys support that team. You've had some good teams, so I'm not picking on you. But just because you're in last in that division now and have been the last couple of years, I'll use you as an example. Every year you're in that division, you're like, every year we've got London, we've got Kitchener. Feels like this is over before it even starts in some seasons, right? So why not just open it up to a conference? Say, we're not stuck with these 3 or 4 teams. There's 9 other teams, and we're going to play them all equally. And all we have to do is get in that top 8, and it just opens up that optimism across markets, right? If you happen to be stuck in one of those heavy divisions. So yeah, I feel like it's artificial. We don't need it. The geography isn't big enough to need it. Let's just dispense with it and go with the conference system.
Yeah, and open up that opportunity in markets, right? Give fans more reason to think that, hey, there's a chance this year, et cetera. This is why I say it seems so easy. The league has got to have a reason for it. And I'm going to start digging into that. I was thinking about that earlier today while I was out walking the dog. I'm like, I got to get to the bottom of this, because I'm sure they have their reasons. But to me, those reasons don't withstand scrutiny in the modern day. And one more thing that Josh Brown mentioned in his brownie points this past weekend that I still read, even though he didn't mention this podcast once, is that he would like to see, when the playoffs roll around, 1 through 16, forget the conferences and just do it that way, which I can see. And really, the worst thing, what would it be? Ottawa, Windsor, Sault, Erie, which could happen anyway. I think those are the longest trips that anybody would have to make. But I would settle for, well, I don't think I dismiss Josh's idea out of hand. I would settle for start 1 to 8 in the conferences and then start kind of reseeding across the remaining 8 teams. But the idea should be, shouldn't it, to get the 2 very best teams into the OHL final, irrespective of which conference they're in.
Absolutely. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. It's artificial. So yeah, so I think on an upcoming pod, we'll talk about that and why does Josh Brown hate us, and we'll cover those 2 segments. But we're on to something here.
I'm going to see Brownie on Tuesday. I'll just ask him that question. Before I get to the bottom of this with the league, I'll say, hey, Brownie, why do you hate us? What have we ever done to you? Okay, you survived tangent number 1. Now, please stand aside while I get into shameless self-promotion. On the OHL Podcast YouTube channel, I post a weekly video called Fridays with Farwell. I know it's really clever because I put it out on Friday and my last name is Farwell, but it's just a little thought of what I've seen in the league or something that's on my mind. And this week, Dan, it was the following, and I'd like to get your answer to the question. Have the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds post-trade deadline become the scariest team in the Western Conference? My argument for that is because of the guy they traded for in Carter George. His first 9 games, he wins 6. He puts up 3 shutouts, only lost once in regulation. He's got 8 career shutouts. 3 of them have come in the last month since being traded to the Sioux. His numbers are ridiculous at a 1.54 goals against average and a 940 save percentage. So with that being the basis for my argument, Dan Mahar, are the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds suddenly and perhaps quietly the scariest team in the Western Conference?
I'm actually gonna push back and say no. And the reason I say no, and this isn't an insult to Sioux, I think they're plenty scary, and I'm not saying that they're all Carter George, but I do find that teams predicated on goaltending, in my experience in the game, you can get to those guys over time, over a series. A goalie can't score goals. A goalie can't do everything himself. So you get a book on him. You get to know his tendencies. You can get to a goal. And I say this as a Hab fan, a team that was predicated on Carey Price for so long, and it didn't really ever get them over the hump. And I'm not saying that Sioux is exactly the same, but a goaltender will make your team threatening, scary, but it won't be the be-all and end-all for me. I think at that top of that conference, I think pretty clearly right now, Flint, Windsor, and Kitchener have separated a little bit. I think when Sioux gets Brady Martin back, I find that every bit as scary as Carter George. So I think when you put both them in healthy, the additions they made, Chase Reed gets healthy as well, having Kluche come back, that's not a team I'd like to play. I think they're plenty threatening. I would not set them ahead of the rest, though, in terms of scariest, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm glad you mentioned Brady Martin's name, because one of the other elements I would add to my argument is they're doing all of this without Brady Martin, who continues to suffer the longest short-term injury in the history of hockey. Dan, have you not been on the phone with Kyle Raftis yet to get to the bottom of this? Come on.
Well, I said, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So they're rolling. Who needs this Brady Martin guy? I mean, he's probably gonna be a healthy scratch, no?
Okay, we know what you need, and that is a little note from every market around this Ontario Hockey League. The team that you cheer for gets a little bit of love each and every week on this show. We promise you that with something we regularly do called the wraparound. It goes in alphabetical order, and we take turns going from Eastern Conference to Western Conference. Dan is on East duty this week, so start us off, my friend, with the Barrie Colts on the wraparound, please and thank you.
Good spot to start, because we talked about goalies and how I was going to be goalie heavy this week. And, we talk a lot about Ben Rebick, but I talked about how deep some of these teams are in goal. How about backup goaltender Arvind Jaswal? So this kid, you look at the leaders in the OHL and you look at the top 5 for shutouts. This is a backup goalie on that list with 2. 12-3, 2.32 GAA, 920 something save percentage. This kid is bringing it night in, night out. So it tells me a couple things. Obviously, kudos to the Barrie Colts. Obviously, very structured, sound defensive team when both goalies post numbers like that. But how about that? Those numbers for a backup goalie, Mike. Arvind Jaswal really putting up numbers when they need him.
Love it. Digging deep a little bit there in Barrie, but very worthy of mention. For me, in the West, it starts in Erie, and tough times we know in Erie this season. Now even Sarnia is starting to pull away in the standings, making it more likely that the Otters will finish 10th in the West. So while you're thinking about the draft lottery, do not forget in Erie about Michael Deck. He's just coming off a nice little 7-game point streak where he scored 5 goals and added 4 assists. That was a great trade for the Erie Otters.
It sure was. Moving to Brampton, Mike, where the Steelheads are nipping at the heels of those Wolves for that 8th playoff spot. But, I can't help but think goaltender Zach Bowen is probably wishing, he could get a little more help on the offensive side. And as he commits to the Rochester Institute of Technology next year, I'm sure he's scanning their forward group and seeing how much goal scoring there is there. Because just 128 goals for the Brampton Steelheads so far this year. And they need to find a few more goals if they're going to get over that hump.
Yeah, I remember Bowen's weekend last weekend. Remember, he was like seconds away on 2 consecutive nights from shutouts and couldn't get there. He's been working hard and he's been playing well.
Yes, he's doing it.
Off to Flint in the West, 4 wins in a row puts the Firebirds back on top of the Western Conference. And after scoring just once in an 11-game stretch, Nathan Aspinall is picking up the pace. 3 goals in 2 games on the weekend. He's now got 11 points in his past 5 games, and he continues to set the OHL scoring pace with 73 points to lead the way.
Nice. And the Brantford Bulldogs, Mike, remember how everybody talked about how undefeated they are? Well, Brantford, I'm not going to bust your chops for losing 5-1 in his statement game with the Ottawa 67s. We'll let you lick your wounds over that one. I'm going to keep it more positive this week and just point out Avery Hayes, who played there for a few years. You remember him. Got his Pittsburgh Penguins NHL debut this week, scores on his first shift, and then a few minutes later scores again. 2 goals in the first period of his first NHL game. Love to see it for Avery Hayes, former Bulldog. And
absolutely. Pete. Yeah, and you know what? From Hamilton into Brantford, like, what opportunity are you getting there as fans of the Bulldogs franchise to see players in your city one day for $25 to $30 and then watch them go on to exploits in the NHL, which we know Nick Lardis is not far from doing either. So
very soon.
Okay, I'm looking at Guelph next, and I got to wonder, Dan, did Jaco Wysick get the OHL podcast bump? You mentioned this guy last week. You said he's finding out how hard the league is, but don't give up on him. Don't worry. It is. It's a grind. It's not an easy league. And then what does he go out and do? Just after getting the OHL podcast bump, he scores his first goal in 18 games. He did it in the game against the Kitchener Rangers. His previous goal, so that game against the Kitchener Rangers was on February the 6th. His previous goal had come all the way back on December the 10th in Flint. So the OHL podcast bump goes to Jaco Wysick. Yeah, it's a tough league, but the kid can still play in it. Don't worry about a thing.
Yeah, and I only picked on him because I know he's going to be phenomenal in this league, so it's going to make a better example in 2 years.
Bingo.
All right, the Kingston Frontenacs, Mike, and this is going to sound like an insult, but I always like to find this time of the year who is the most mid team in the league. And the Kingston Frontenacs coming in.
Dansky, I gotta go there this week. What are you
know,
doing to me? I'm gonna take heat for you. I get enough of my own.
I'm going to bring it around as you'll see. It's a compliment in a second.
Just remember, Mahar said this. It's not Farwell. It's just Dan Mahar.
I mean this only statistically, Kingston, because you're 24, 22, and 2. You've got 154 goals for, 152 against. You're pretty much playing that midline, right? But the reason I'm saying this as a compliment is that of late you've been well better than mid, and part of the reason you're well better than mid is the run Gavin Betts has gone on in his last 10, 8-2, 2.12, and a 9.24. Brought them from significantly below mid to slightly above mid. So we'll check back in 2 weeks. But as of right now, you're my midline, Kingston.
I can't wait to talk to Troy, man, before the game on Friday. Hey, mediocre man, how's it going? That's great. Dan Mahar, just throwing daggers, and I have to go and defend him. That's perfect.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm looking at Kitchener next in the West, and the Rangers' power play is sizzling right now. It went 6 for 12 on the weekend. That's right. It went 6 for 12 on the weekend. Extended. The Rangers have gone 15 for their past 45 on the power play in their past 10 games. They now move up to third in the league in the power play category behind Brantford and Windsor. So trending in the right direction in a big way. And by the way, the Rangers lost their first game in regulation in 26 in that game in Niagara that was so well attended this past weekend.
Yeah, quite a run there.
You bet.
So moving to North Bay, I'm going to keep my goaltending theme going here, Mike. You mentioned him earlier in the podcast, goaltender Jack Lisson, a 2006 born kid. And this is why you are patient with goalies. A 15th round pick, and everything was about Mike McIver this year, dealing with some health issues. In comes Jack Lisson. What's he done? 16-7, 2.35, 914 save percentage, 16-7. So he's putting up the numbers. So sometimes you just be a little bit patient. These kids aren't at 16 what they will be at 19. So Jack Lisson really bringing it for the North Bay team this year.
Great. Another great eye. I got to see him play when I was up there a little over a month ago and was rather impressed for sure.
Yeah.
London is next for me in the West, and somebody forgot to tell the Knights that they traded their captain and other key veterans at the deadline because they are sitting on a 7-game point streak, not losing in regulation since January the 21st up in the Sioux. Extended for London, they've got points in 10 of 11 games, and they have been to overtime or a shootout, a league high 15 times have the Knights.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. But they're in games, right?
They're in games.
Yeah.
Keeping it close. That's battle. Yeah. And speaking of battle, Mike, the Niagara Ice Dogs, who we just talked about, they're a team that hard to figure out, right? Like good early swoons, up and down. What are they? And I never hear people quite sure what they are. But one guy who statistically I look at, I can't figure it out because Ethan Zada has, in his draft year last year, had a decent year, got himself drafted into the NHL. And then this year, statistically, a bit of a down step, right? You're not quite pacing, just 33 points at this point in the season, minus 14, looking like, is this a regression? But then you watch him play and say, he's still bringing it. And you saw a great goal going to the net against Kitchener in that game. Still producing. So sometimes the stats aren't always sometimes you have to watch. The eye test tells you more, but still would like to see a little more production from Ethan Zada if that team is going to get home ice advantage in the playoffs, which they still have a shot at.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of a pop quiz, completely unexpected when I look at Owen Sound here in the West, Dan, because 19-year-old defenseman Braden Rogers has committed to Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, to play with the NCAA's Tigers. No date has been yet attached to that commitment. But do you know how many players now with Rogers being added to the list from the Attack have made or announced NCAA commitments?
That's putting me on the spot. I
don't expect you to necessarily know, but I thought it'd be a fun way to look at it.
Yeah, I'm going to guess and say 6.
Double that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rogers becomes the 12th member of the Attack to announce an NCAA commitment. How do you like that?
And will they all go when they say they're going to go?
Well, this is right, but it's just I found that number staggering.
That is staggering. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, moving to Oshawa. So Oshawa, we all know, had that ugly streak, right? They went better part of 6 weeks without a win, snapped it recently. So I wanted to check in things. The eye test tells me that team is competing. They're in every game, like you just said, with the London Knights. And yeah, since snapping that streak, 3-4. 24 goals for, 23 against. So they're in games. Every game is close, and I love to see that battle, that compete. And what that tells me is the kids who have taken the keys to the wheel right now, they're starting to step up and find their game. So Oshawa has gone from, a rough first half of the year to what we like to see in the second half, which is progress, compete, and being in games. So good on those Generals.
And those fans you talked about earlier that are still going out to support are going to watch this team grow together. And who knows, maybe a couple more trips back to back to the OHL final in the future.
Yep, they're doing it right.
Next stop for me is in Saginaw, and Levi Harper is the highest scoring rookie blue liner in Saginaw Spirit history. 17 years old, recorded his 38th point of the season a week ago to pass Zane Parekh for the most by a rookie blue liner in a single season in SAG, and Harper continues to pile on, raising the bar on the record. He's now up to 42 points in 51 games with 9 goals, 33 assists. Dan, I remember we were in Saginaw, I feel like, it was around the Thanksgiving weekend, Canadian Thanksgiving, so October, first 10-ish games of the season, and I remember watching this kid, and I'm like, what? Who? He leapt off the ice. And in a chat afterwards, we're like, smooth skating, right shot D. We shouldn't put the tag on him. But boy, he looks a lot like Zane Parekh. And now he's reestablishing Zane Parech's records in Saginaw. Man, Dave Drinkle and crew know how to find him, don't they?
And a late birthday, not even draft eligible for this kid. Yeah. He's going to get some attention.
Sure is.
Terrific player. All right, Mike, just because you started, I'm going to throw a pop quiz at you. So the Ottawa 67s are tremendous. They're running right at the top of the league, second, I believe, in points percentage now, but right up there. How far down the list of top scorers in the league do you think I'd have to go to find an Ottawa 67?
Ooh. I bet you're going sub 20 for sure. I'm going to go sub 25.
Outstanding guess, Mr. Farwell. Outstanding. 27.
27.
Yeah, and that's Cooper Foster, who just in his most recent game, 3-point game, went above the point per game at 50 points in 49 games. But what that tells me is, again, a deep, committed roster. They're doing it by committee. There's no one's wowing you with individual stats. It's just a good, solid team game. And to further that point, a league low 20th overall for penalty minutes. So a very disciplined team playing as a team, not relying on any one player, one line to carry them.
Such a great story this year. The 67s are, aren't they?
Oh, indeed. Just great to watch.
Over to Sarnia for me, and the Sting picked up their first road win of 2026 last Friday in Oshawa. They liked the feeling so much, they went out and picked up their second one night later in Brampton. And don't look now, but with Saginaw dropping 6 of its past 7, Sarnia is just 5 points behind the Spirit for the final playoff spot in the West. I was the one that boldly declared the West standings set, with the exception of who finishes 6, 7, or 8. But I was writing off Sarnia and Erie a week ago. The Sting are trying to make me eat my words.
Well, and I did too. I'll own it too. I did too. And we had some of our YouTube commenters from Saginaw questioning us, saying, I don't know. I'm not so sure about my Spirit. So we'll see.
Okay. Hey, all you smarties in Saginaw, just shut up for a minute, okay?
And we talked a lot about the trade deadline, Mike. And I just like seeing how teams change dynamic after the trade deadline. And the Peterborough Petes, they added Kieran Walton, a huge ad. So watching him play that in, a beautiful overtime goal. When you see a player that size that can move like that and find himself room in open ice and then can fire the puck like he can, for that win over the Owen Sound attack, what a dynamic change it is for that Peterborough offense when they find a player like that. And also just more good news for the Petes on the way, despite the pending suspensions we talked about. Rear guard James Petrovsky about to return from injury, which will be a huge boost to them because that is a big piece for them on the back end.
Off to Sault Ste. Marie, our northernmost outpost in the West, and Marco Mignosa has become the 19th player in Greyhounds history to score 100 goals with the club. We know it's a storied history up there in the Sioux, and Mignosa joins that club. He reached the milestone last week in a win over Saginaw. Mignosa this season, 20 goals, 42 assists in 48 games. The Tampa Bay Lightning took a little flyer on him last June, grabbing him in the 7th round.
And Mike, if we ever do our all underrated list in the OHL, Marco Mignosa might be on mine. He's right at the top. So. All right, I don't want to get political on the podcast and wrap around, but I'm just going to end with a note on Sudbury, Mike, and just say that with municipal elections looming later this year, consider who you vote for, because Ward 11 Councillor Bill LeDuc in the greater Sudbury area is vowing to cancel the arena deal and have a referendum on whether or not they want this thing after all. So, and he is running for mayor in the upcoming election. Don't know what his chances are. They don't look great, but I'm just saying consider your vote depending on which side of the arena debate you're on. But for those, as an OHL fan, for the fans of Sudbury, I hope that Mr. Leduc is not mayor.
Dan, I was just there like a month and a bit ago. The Brotherhood of the Traveling Hat originated in Sudbury. The work is already underway. Like, they took away my favorite coffee shop. They took away the wing joint. Like, Leduc, you can't stop this now, can you? The ball is rolling down the hill.
I don't think you can stop it, but I'm just pointing it out so that you're informed before the elections happen. That's all.
Vote out Bill Leduc. Whatever you do, vote him out. All right. I know nothing about Sudbury politics either, but this sounds like a guy I don't want on my council. And to Windsor for me, the final stop in the West, Liam Greentree has become the first Windsor Spitfires player since Ryan Ellis to reach the 300-point milestone, and only the third ever in franchise history. Along with Ellis, who reached the milestone in 2010, 2011, current Spits GM Bill Bowler put up 467 career points in Windsor. And just to take this beyond the Spitfires, in the past 20 years, 21 OHLers in the past 20 years have put up 300 points. Those include the likes of John Tavares, Dylan Strome, Nick Suzuki, and Mitch Marner. So Liam Greentree puts himself in some very good company.
And can I just say, just to end on that point,
Sure.
You and I are older. We've been following this league longer. For a newer generations of fans, they hear names like Bill Bowler and think, yeah, exactly, league exec. And we remember just how good a player this guy and many of the other execs in this league were, right? And as players, they just dominated. Bill Bowler, like you just referenced his point total. What a player that guy was.
Yeah, okay. So, Dan, you realize I have to make another trip to Windsor, too, right? So now I'm going to go to Kingston this weekend, that you just called mediocre, and I have to deal with the fallout from that. I'm going to go to Windsor later on, and Bowler's head's going to be so huge, he'll be even more insufferable than usual. Like, you're killing me, Dansky.
I had to make sure I'm welcome in at least one other city. But, I will just say, Kingston, before you kill me, statistically mid as of today.
Mid. Yes. That's what the takeaway is going to be, right? Yeah, statistically mid. That's what everybody heard. Sure. All right. We always welcome your feedback and interaction on this show. Dan talked about the YouTube comments. We've got the email inbox, and we're going into the email in bag in just a moment. Plus, remembering a sports legend, his banner hangs in an arena in this league for a reason. Plus, our weekly prospects of the week. Still to come on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. Dan, I mentioned this earlier. We have had a ton of emails this past week. Love getting them. We love interacting with you. Happy to bring topics to the show that are interesting to you, answer any questions you might have. We got an email from Mark Crawford, and I got super excited until I realized it wasn't that Mark Crawford. But this Mark Crawford we like too. And it was like, greetings from your new regular. He has found our podcast, and Mark had a lot to say in his introductory email. I couldn't possibly get into all of it, but please do what Mark did. Send us an email anytime to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. One of my favorite parts of it was because context matters, Mark talked about having given up social media because he didn't like the way people behaved on there. And he had the distinct impression from social media that I was some kind of blowhard that hated the London Knights. But now that he listens to this podcast, he realizes I'm just as fair to the Knights as I am to anybody else. So see, context matters. But a few of the things that jumped out at me from Mark's email, Dan, and one of them I'm sure we can get behind is Mark talked about fans in some arenas who seem to enjoy getting on the case of players on the other team. And I think it's a really important reminder here. These are teenagers, and yeah, I get it. They're playing for the other team, and you paid your money, you can have your fun at the game, but I'm hoping we can find a better way to have fun than yelling insults at teenage hockey players.
Yeah. So thanks for the email, Mark. It's great to hear from you. Terrific email. But yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I know people might say, oh, you're just, what are you, soft? But yeah, the whole dynamic, you're absolutely right about social media. The way people behave on there is absolutely ludicrous half the time. But yeah, you're dealing with teenage hockey players. You can pay your money and go to the game. That doesn't entitle you to be an absolute jackass, right? Especially to teenage hockey players. Most of these kids, and I think you can speak to this as well as anyone, Mike, but most of these kids off the ice are just terrific kids. I mean, you get some bad apples, but most of them are super mature kids, great in the community and whatnot, and you're yelling at them. Why? Because they wear a color that's different from the team that you support. Let's be a little more reasonable when you go to the game. Buying a ticket does not entitle you to that. At least in my opinion, it doesn't.
So Mark is going to be really disappointed with this answer, Dan, because not only are you supporting him, but you're agreeing with me. One of the other things he says is he'd like to see us go head to head a little more often here and debate things. And I mean, just from my perspective, look, I've been in broadcasting for longer than I care to admit right now. And I've heard it all, and I've been a part of a lot of different things, and I've worked in sports radio in Toronto before, and I've been parts of some of those shows where you see a little bit more of lively debate. This is just me. This is just me as a broadcaster, and really when we started this podcast, the whole idea was to kind of celebrate this league and the game at this level. We love the game. I know Dan and I and all of you as fans love the game at this level. I would like to celebrate it as much as humanly possible. I know it's not perfect, and we'll call it out when it's not, but for the most part, that's the idea here. And to be perfectly honest, as a broadcaster, I find that sometimes those more controversial, heated, hot take type shows, or where guys are arguing back and forth, my opinion, I feel fairly comfortable in saying so, though, they're mostly contrived. They do that kind of on purpose as part of a shtick. And for my perspective, the shtick that Dan and I bring here are just two guys that really love the league and want to bring you some insights into it.
Yeah, very well said, Mike. And I think this harkens back to a conversation you and I first had when you were asking me if I had interest in joining and doing this. I said one of the first things I said was, I'm not a show guy. I'm not going to do things I'm not going to state opinions just to drum up controversy. I'll tell you what I think. Maybe it's boring. Maybe it's not controversial. I don't know, but I'm going to be true to what I actually believe, and so I think, yeah, that's why sometimes we often agree a lot. Although how's this? I will disagree with Mark. So he said you are a blowhard that hates the London Knights. It
wasn't his exact words, but
I was just going to say, you don't hate the London Knights.
No, wait. I am a blowhard. He's not wrong. He's not wrong, Mark. I am a blowhard. It's true. And to Dan's point about we can only be our authentic selves here. We can only bring what we bring, and we're not going to fake anything, so to speak. But I do have another tangent to go on when we get to our next email. So just one more point. And look, Mark, Dan and I may disagree on things along the way, and we will bring strong opinions again when we feel it's warranted. We're just not going to set it up that way deliberately. That's all. One more thing from Mark's email. He mentioned that he thought the Belleville Bulls was the best jersey in the league. I have one in my set here behind me along with the Cornwall Royals. He also, Mark likes the Sudbury Wolves. Dan, a favorite for you? We did this on the show last year, as I recall, our three favorites.
Yeah, we did. And I'm again, Mark, sorry to be so agreeable, but I am 100% with you on the Belleville Bulls. You know me, I love that Belleville Bull jersey that's over Mike's left shoulder. And I even love the yellow version they have that they would wear sometimes. I am a huge fan of the old Belleville jerseys. So yeah, and we talked about our top three. I can't even remember what mine were at this point, but there's some real classics. So the Sudbury Wolves have had some good ones, but I am a big fan of the classic Greyhounds jersey, even the third jersey with just the Greyhound with no lettering on there. So there's some real classic ones in this league. But if you ask me number one, it's that Bulls one right there.
Yeah, and you're biased though because the Mahar family roots run deep in Quinte region, don't they?
That is true and that is fair. Although I will say, in terms of just the pure aesthetic of a jersey, I'm not sure I let my bias fly. I either love it or I don't. Now, I'll say something controversial right now. How's that?
Okay, please do.
I don't love the barber poles that the Ottawa 67s wear. How's that? There.
Okay, it's allowed. I don't know why you wouldn't, but hey, that's allowed. All right. And I have the Bulls jersey here and the Cornwall jersey, primarily because those are two markets I would love to see back in the Ontario Hockey League, but I have a difficult time disagreeing, especially on those yellow Bulls jerseys, Dan. And who didn't love going into the old Yardman Arena? Now is it the CAA Center up there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but having the bull mounted, the Biggs bull head mounted to the wall in the arena, just fantastic stuff. So
Yeah.
yes, I really do like the jersey as well. Although my favorite in the OHL remains the classic maroon and white Pete's jersey. It's just so simple, so classic. I've loved it since I was a kid, and it's still my favorite, even though I'm based in Kitchener and I cover the Rangers. So there you go.
Yeah,
All right.
I might have that might have been my number one too when we did that. I can't remember, but I had the Pete's on there for sure.
And I'm with you on the Sioux. I love the red primarily, with
Yes.
the white circle and the red greyhound in the midst of it. But anyway, great, some great jerseys for sure. Another email. This one comes from James. First starts with announcerisms, because we were talking last week about unanswered goals. We had an email about that, and we kind of went into it a little bit. James is not a huge fan of a player getting a penalty and the announcer saying he'll go to the box for 2 minutes or less. Because, of course, cleverly, if the team scores a power play goal, he'll be in there for less than 2 minutes. Any strong feelings on that, Dan?
No strong feelings. I will just say, if you're an announcer that is a fan of accuracy, then you would state it that way, right? Because you're not going to state definitively he's in the box for 2 minutes, because it might not be true. So you just add the or less, because it might be less. So I would just defend the announcers again on that and saying that if you're looking for accuracy, if you just say he goes to the box for 2 minutes, you're going to have a handful of people sitting at home on their couch saying, well, maybe not. What if they score? So I'm just saying, in those in favor of accuracy, that's accurate.
You go to box, you feel shame? Straight from Slapshot. If you didn't get
Absolutely.
that reference, please go listen to another go listen to the OHL in 74 podcast instead. On this point, and I'm going to tie it back to something that Dan and I talked about years ago, even before this podcast. But I will say, James, and kind of in defense of, and then turn it around on myself, but in defense of broadcasters, at least me, who along with doing this podcast, yes, does do play-by-play in the Ontario Hockey League and has for many years, I find myself always looking for new ways to say things because, frankly, like you say a lot of words per minute, the game moves fast, you're on the air for 3 periods 68 times a year, then playoffs, blah, 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 blah. The time adds up, the games add up, there are a lot of words, and even I get sick of saying the same things, and I wonder, does the listener get sick of hearing the same thing? So you try to find other things to say. Having said that, I find myself often these days, the older I get, I'm like, well, why reinvent the wheel? He shoots, he scores is still he shoots, he scores, right? Foster Hewitt made it famous for a reason, and it just makes sense. So I get where you're coming from, but in defense of the broadcasters, I think we're always trying to look at different ways of saying things. But I'll go back to something, Dan. I don't know if you remember this, but you expressed to me a bit of a pet peeve for announcers when there's like a minute 20 left on the clock would say $1.20. And, you know, I was one of those announcers, and I don't think I've said it since. I might have let it slip once or twice, but I'm like, you know what? You're right. Why do we say $1.20? There's a minute 20. That's it. So,
you know what? I will say on that point, because I was going to use that actually to defend you, because that was a former work colleague who came to me one day and said, you know, do you ever notice, like, Farwell always says this? Can you tell him to not stop saying that? And I my takeaway from it was, what a tough crowd. Like, what a tough, like, so announcers have to get through a 3-hour event of calling the action, which is often quite repetitive in terms of the types of things that are occurring, and try to mix it up with different phrasing and different things, all at the pace of the game. And we're nitpicking little tiny phrases. So yeah, maybe it's fair to say, oh, this one's maybe a little overused or whatnot, but just keep that in mind. It's a tough crowd. So anyway, I'm defending the announcers. I'm not one. I've never done it, but I imagine that if I were, I'd like a little leeway to say, well, you know what? He used that phrase, big deal.
The other thing James asked about, Dan, was the trajectory of coaches beyond the OHL. Now, I didn't take the time, quite frankly, to go into every American League team or all of the assistant coaches, but I can look in the National Hockey League right now and see Chris Knobloch, the former coach in Erie, now coaching Edmonton. Paul Maurice in Florida, of course, used to coach Windsor in this league. Sheldon Keefe in New Jersey was in the Sioux in this league. Andre Tourigny in Utah right now was in Ottawa in this league just before Dave Cameron got there. Bruce Cassidy in Vegas right now was with the Kingston Frontenacs. Spencer Carberry in Washington right now was with the Saginaw Spirit not all that long ago, maybe 10 years ago. Those are some direct links that I can find today. But to James's specific question, yes, this is a development league for officials, coaches, general managers, broadcasters, just as much as it is for players. But I don't have a direct line.
Well, I know, and there's a million pathways in hockey, and we know with the coaching carousel, they change every couple of years. But yeah, I would say, and not just head coaches. You look at Steve Spott in Boston, Mike Vellucci in Chicago. You see these guys everywhere, right? And Vellucci, I'll add, was an absolutely terrific coach in the OHL.
Sure
and
was with the
one
Plymouth
name you
Whalers.
mentioned there, yeah, for sure. And one name you mentioned there was Spencer Carberry, who I think is the John Cooper in waiting, will we call him? I think he's quickly evolving into one of the top coaches in the NHL and will have his shot behind a Team Canada bench someday. Or this is where these guys go. So the trajectory is different for every guy, every coach. They all have their aspirations of being an NHL head coach, but a lot of them land all over the world, Europe, you name it. So they're not long for this league if they're really good.
And depending on that particular coach's ambitions, because James asks in the email, is there a clear path? No, there's not. You can go from, the Ontario Hockey League to an American Hockey League head coaching or assistant job, maybe an East Coast head coaching job, an NHL assistant job, but some, and I don't know that he's said this to me directly, but I'll just use the one closest to me, and that is UC Ahokas in Kitchener. I don't think that he intends on being an assistant anywhere after he leaves Kitchener. I think he wants to be a head coach in the National Hockey League, and I'll bet you he will get that opportunity. So he'll go from head coach in the OHL to head coach in the National Hockey League somewhere, would be my assumption. And it can go that way, or it can be to an assistant's role somewhere or a head coaching role in a league beneath the National Hockey League. But there's no straight line. Want to take a quick moment to acknowledge Pistol Pete. Pete James, a longtime London broadcaster, yes, on the air radio. I was just talking about that one on my second tangent to the show for London Knights games, but also just a fixture in sports in London. His banner hangs at Canada Life Place, up there with all of the other championship banners for the London Knights. He's known as the godfather of London sports and passed away this past week at the age of 89. I got to know Pete over my years in this league, and he was a great guy. His nickname was Pistol, and he was just so much fun to talk to, had all kinds of great stories, always made time for you, too. As much as a legend as he was, I couldn't believe he remembered my name. But I remember going into London, into a media room one time, and I had been introduced to Pete by my late broadcast partner, Don Cameron. And so Don makes the introduction because Don was also an older gentleman. These two had known each other for decades by this point. And the next time we went back, then Pete remembered my name, and I was blown away. And I also then sat there at the table with Don Cameron and Pete James, and I just listened. And I also remembered or thought to myself, there is 100 years of OHL experience between these guys. Of course, I'm just going to shut up and listen to them, right? Anyway, Pistol was terrific, passed away this past week at the age of 89. And we just wanted to acknowledge what he meant to the game, what he meant to London, and condolences, of course, to family and friends.
Yeah, well said. It sucks when we lose the legends of this game, but he was one for sure.
There's no question about that. Okay, as we wrap up, I mean, we're going for the OHL in 90 on the podcast this week. Like, honestly, Domani and Wardy are laughing at us so much right now. Me and my I told you I was a blowhard. Prospect of the week before we wrap up, Dan Mahar, which NHL eligible player did catch the most of your attention this week?
This is like when I chirp a guy in my beer league, right? And then I fall on my face. That's kind of what, yeah. So.
That's exactly it. I deserve everything I get. Everything.
All right, so prospect of the week, I'm going to go a little bit down the list just to acknowledge a guy that I think is under the radar but richly deserves it. And that is going to Flint Firebirds defender Dryden Allen, who a Niagara Falls born player who put up 20 points. He's kind of that hybrid, that defender that can kind of do everything in the modern game, can move the puck, can stay at home, can clear the net front. I just think it's his second year of NHL eligibility, and I think he's a big reason why Flint is where they are this year, and I don't think he's going to go overlooked in another NHL draft. So Dryden Allen is a guy who I think NHL teams are taking note of this year.
He's got to be on the all-name team in the OHL, doesn't he? Dryden Allen? That's fantastic.
That's not bad.
All right. I'm going to give love to a market that you gave love to earlier, Dan, because of how they continue to support the team in a difficult season. And I think you need to look for some positives there. And really, you don't have to look that hard when it comes to Oshawa, where I am looking for my prospect of the week. I'm looking at Brooks Rogowski. This is a guy that had a nice little run of goals in 3 straight games, 5 points in a 4-game span. Look, he skates well. What really impresses me the most is how he plays away from the puck. He's got a really good IQ, plays that 200-foot game that we talk about a whole lot. And because it's not the best season in Oshawa right now, their social media admin had a little bit of fun this past week, which I really enjoy. Like the folks running those social media channels are doing a good job. And they pointed out that actually Brooks Rogowski growing up wanted to be a baseball player. So we talk a lot about Jackson Cover with the London Knights, roller hockey into ice hockey, and now he's a highly regarded prospect. Don't overlook the pursuit of athletic excellence, even in another sport, as Rogowski just kind of starts to find himself here as a hockey player. So I think there's a lot of raw material there, and Brooks Rogowski is a guy that I'm keeping my eye on this week as my prospect of the week.
Yeah, and a player who I would say NHL scouts would describe as projectable. Size and skating, they can see how he might evolve over the years. So looking forward to watching it.
All right. I know we're going to take some heat from our buddy Mark, who helps us on the editing and video side of this podcast. We're probably going to take heat from, well, I'm going to get it from Troy Mann when I go to Kingston this week. Thanks for nothing, Mahar. And I know I'm going to get it from colleagues and whatever. I'm open for it. That's what we're here for. You can consume what you want to consume, but I think there are a lot of great radio play-by-play guys that you should be giving some love to. Also, some really good print journalists that are worth the subscription for some local journalism. They're covering this league, and the more we can support that, the more coverage we're going to get. I'm going to leave it there because this has gone on a long time. You might have had to listen to it this week in 3 parts. Send us email anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Find Dan Mahar on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell_OHL. And we're on the social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, the OHL Podcast, also the YouTube channel, the OHL Podcast. And we're back next Tuesday, unless it's already. Dan, is it already next Tuesday?
It might be by now, yeah.
Another episode next Tuesday morning of the OHL Podcast.